Hi everybody, this is Trevor Meyer here, just giving you a walkthrough of my machine project and how I set things up for the LoopOp Superbooth 2021 project. It was a fun contest and I decided to take it on by working in Machine. I haven't done a complete track in Machine before, so it seemed like a fun idea. So just show you a few things that I did here. First was laying out all the samples on their own groups. And at first I had groups with every synth, like all of the Nymphes synths on one group, but I found it easier in the end to break out each sound to its own group. So the Nymphes space sound and the unison sound, they're each on their own groups here. Makes it easier to work with. And another thing I did is I used one group exclusively for effects. So this way you could have a send from other tracks to this reverb, for example, on the first sound in the effects group, and just saved a lot on CPU. I was running into CPU limits quite a bit, so this trick helped quite a bit. Another thing I did was resampling tracks. So I used the Nagra samples from Heinbach, which were great, but I did a bunch of effects on them, and it was pretty expensive CPU-wise. I had used this, the new Other Desert Cities delay, 2 instances of it in this case. So once I got it set up the way that I liked, I resampled back into Machine from this sound into its own new audio channel, this one here called print. And that way I could just play back as needed without having to worry about the CPU from the effects. A little composition thing I did here was just establishing the root tone. I wanted to work in the Lydian mode because I haven't done a whole track in that before. So I just created kind of something that was light in the background here at the beginning. It's kind of this chaotic opening, but something I realized I needed something to anchor us. So I created this establishing little recurring theme before our main theme comes in here at about bar 14. And it just anchors us in a particular mode and root tone. Some other things I did was trying to work with the samples that we were given. There were certain sounds I couldn't get that I wanted. So one of the things I did was to create a sort of pad of my own by playing very quickly with one of the pad sounds. In this case, it's a Hydrasynth saw. And I just played it very fast, as you can see here. And that gave me the sort of pad sound that I wanted. I actually did quite a bit of messing with the samples to kind of get them to work the way I wanted. One of the things was the Nymphes sounds were great, but they were in mono, and some of them were quite complex, and I wanted something simpler. So what I did was I took the samples into Logic. I took one sample and I panned it all the way left, and another sample and panned it all the way right and pitched it down by however many semitones the next step was. So in this case, 6 semitones. And then a trick I can show you here. If you create a bus, so these are all sending to bus number 1, which is this one here. You can create a region on that bus, and by clicking and dragging to your desktop or to a folder, Logic will automatically take whatever is routed to that bus and export it for you. So there we get some nice stereo samples from what were mono samples, just by panning left and right and then a quick drag and drop. Now, this was a lot of work because I had to do this for every single sample in all the ones that were mono, which took a while. The other thing I did to modify the samples was to chop them up into something smaller. So actually, I'll show you the original. This sample kind of evolves quite a bit from the beginning here. So both are very cool sounds, that opening kind of saw and then the kind of growl in the second part. But I wanted to be able to use them each independently. So what I did is I took the samples and I chopped them so that I had the beginning part. So this I turned into its own sample set in Decent Sampler. And then I also took the back half and turned it into its own sample set. And that's actually not that difficult. Decent Sampler, the files are actually just text files. So in this case, I was working with the wait for it samples. And then instead of wait for it, I had done waiting and do not wait. But I'll show you what these look like. So if you open the Decent Sampler, the .ds presets, in a text editor, you can see that it's just an XML file. It looks a bit scary at first, but really it's a lot of repeating information. And there's something fairly straightforward here that you can see, which is here's the file name for each sample. And it also shows the pitches. And I didn't have to modify much of this. When I exported new samples, I changed the file name here. Sometimes I had to change the loop start and the loop end if I wanted the sample to loop, and sometimes I also needed to change the start and end if I was just reusing a sample as it was. But it's just a bunch of text editing. I could use search and replace for most of it, and then I was able to have sounds that were exactly what I wanted. So then in Decent Sampler, this is my Decent Sampler folder, and the sample libraries would show up here. And these are my newly created stereo sample sets, and then these are the chopped samples. And this way I'm able to have direct access to the part of the sound that I want. So these are both from the same sample on the Nymphes, but much more useful for me. There's a couple generative things that I did. One was I used some patches in Reaktor using the blocks configuration. This is the blue set of blocks. And you can use it to generate different notes and tell it what key you want. And I have this assigned to a MIDI map on my machine controller so that I can play this live. What you do is you have a machine track recording from the Reaktor MIDI output. As you play along, this will generate some MIDI, and it kind of creates, it's kind of like having an arpeggiator that's more under your control, something that has more variety in the way that it can play. So that was really fun. And the other thing that I created was in VCV Rack, I've been watching a bunch of Omri Cohen's amazing tutorials. This is taking off of one of the ideas he had. And there's no oscillators in here. What I have instead is I would take audio in through here and run it through a couple of effects. So in one case, I would have the audio recorded into the recorder here, and then the recorder, as you can see, will play back at different speeds in forward and reverse. And then there's also some delays and filters so that as I open the filter, the higher frequencies create a delay. So I took a track, the bell tones, and I ran them through the VCV effects here. That was this one. So here I have the original notes. I played this sound out into the inputs of VCV Rack. So I played live by adjusting the filter and playing some of the parameters, and then recorded the result here, and then used the audio, plugin, I guess, in Machine to then play these back. So that's most of the stuff that I did. But it was really fun. I really enjoyed this project. It was a good learning experience, and I hope that you can learn something from what I did. All right, cheers.